Mark, so let's get started with the simple stuff, right? Just brief intro to who are you, what you're currently doing, what is Business Software all about, and the other events that you organize.
Sure. Hi, Richard. Thank you very much for taking the time today to have a conversation. It's a really important one. I am Mark Littlewood. I run the Business of Software conferences. We've been running an annual conference in America for 13 years now. Next year will be the 14th, and a European conference for 6 years. We also run events that help people build better products and build better companies. We run workshops, we run evening events and various things, and we've got a fantastic network of people around the world. I suppose the common thing that everyone has of interest is learning to be better at what they're doing, either as an entrepreneur or a product person, and want to build stuff that they can be proud of. So we're based in Cambridge, England. We have an office up in Manchester. We're pretty small, but embracing the remote working culture.
Okay, cool. So let me ask you very, very straightforwardly, why did you accept to speak with us here? Because I'm sure it would have been very easy to say, I'm busy, it's the holiday season, blah, blah, blah.
Well, the truth is, Richard, I'm not busy, I'm not important. I struggle to fill my diary with things to do. So anybody that invites me to anything, I'll hop on. No, more seriously, I've known you for a long time, and I like what you stand for and how you think. And I think this is a very important topic. The whole climate change issue is something that is pretty pressing, and it really struck me when you got in contact that you had quite an interesting angle that affected the industry and the people that we work with and the community that we serve. Okay,
so let's start with where you stand, right? Just personally, Mark Littlewood, who lives in Cambridge, where I've been asking people to imagine like a spectrum where you've got Extinction Rebellion on the one end and Donald Trump on the other. You can sort of work out probably what ideologies they represent. Where are you on that spectrum?
I would say I'm 80% of the way towards the climate extinction end. I think climate change is here, and scientific facts. It's happening, and it's an existential risk to not the planet. The planet doesn't care. The planet's going to be around for ages. It's an existential risk to humanity and humans. So I think it's a really big challenge, and it's something that we need to address both at a policy level, at all the way from policy through to changing personal habits.
Do you think the activism is helping? Not activism in general, but the extreme sort of Extinction Rebellion activism. How do you feel about that kind of?
So on one level, it can be inconvenient, and it's cost us a little bit of money. So an example, we run a conference which I mentioned in the US. So we were flying out to Boston, and 2 weeks before we were about to fly, we heard that there was going to be a protest at Heathrow, and people were going to be flying low-level drones on the Friday when we actually had our flight booked. And that caused some stress and some challenge. We actually ended up getting a flight the day earlier, which cost us money, but actually I don't resent paying that. We don't fly a lot. I think it's the only time that we go to America. Personally, I try not to travel if I can, not just because of climate change, but being on aeroplanes is a hateful thing to have to do. And I like being at home. There's plenty to entertain me here, and a lot of the work we do can be carried out using things like Zoom, like this, or there are lots of ways around things. So yes, it's inconvenienced us on some level, but actually I think the game is bigger than personal inconvenience.
Okay, so sure. Okay, great. So you mentioned personal inconvenience, and in this case, it was an inconvenience to your business, right? So
Yeah.
in essence, like your livelihood, your staff, and so on. Maybe not, I don't know to what degree, but there's an aspect there. So as a business, you obviously you're not minding. Is this a conversation that you're having inside your company and with the people you work with, like whether you should be doing anything? Was this like a personal opinion of Mark as the person who's running the show, or was there a conversation?
No, there was a conversation, and so I was giving you my personal opinion. I think actually, however, the people in the organisation uh, would agree with that, and it's certainly something that we discussed. I mean, that particular issue was something that we discussed directly. We run a conference, and whether we like it or not, people travel to come to conferences. So there's no question that we are, on many levels, a net contributor to some of the damage that's being done. It's easy for me to sit back and say, oh, well, the benefit to the rest of the world by us doing what we're doing would outweigh that. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I constantly kind of think about that. There's an argument to say we should run online-only events, but there's a very big difference between an online-only event and an event where people get together. And it's not excusing it. If people weren't coming to our thing, they would be going somewhere else.
What would be the justification? Like, because you said it doesn't necessarily justify the travel if you saying like the net effect, for example, right? The down the line, right? So from the value that your participants are getting from your conference is returned to the industry in some way, like that would make up for it. Of course, it's very hard to quantify, maybe impossible. But what kind of value would you be imagining there? What would be the kind of thing that a conference delivers?
So I'm sure I could hire some absurdly expensive consulting business to kind of come in and quantify the value that we bring, and consultants can quantify and prove anything for you. We as an organisation have really been very careful about thinking about all sorts of things, maybe ahead of their time. We've been talking about remote working as a normal way of working for certainly a decade. We've been talking about mental health in the workplace. We've been talking about doing things the right way, not having to grow a business for the sake of growing a business. You actually have to understand your purpose and the why of what you're doing, and work back from that. So, on one level, I can say, well, we're making a difference to the way that people think and operate around the world, and that is a contributor to happier workplaces, happier workforces, new ways of working, new ways of thinking. But there is no substitute for people getting together and talking about some of those things. And a conference is not just about the talks and the presentations. It's really about that, what they call the hallway track, the getting together, those kind of conversations which almost inevitably go along the lines of, I hate to say this, but I don't know what I'm talking about. Do you know what you're talking about? No, I don't know what I'm talking about. Those kind of honest, open conversations that founders can have about the challenges they have growing businesses. And I think, does that justify, this is a very complicated equation, And as I said, I think we could probably go off and get some BS research done that says that or shows that we're net for good, but I think it would. I think that would be very tenuous, and I don't think that it's something that would necessarily stand up on a proper scientific basis. But I do really fundamentally believe that what we're doing is important. I certainly know that it makes a difference to the way people work and the way people think about business, and we're very openly about building long-term, sustainable, profitable software businesses.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a number of things over the years. Just thinking about this is our notebook logo from 2015. And that's a unicorn prancing around with its stupid horn pricking the bubble that it's inflated for itself. We try not to kind of pursue that growth at any costs thing. I think the people that self-select to come have interest in beyond getting as much money from a venture fund and scaling as big as possible. That being said, there are people that have come over the years who have grown very substantial businesses and Toby Lutker, for example, interesting guy, founder of Shopify,
Mm-hmm.
now a public company, enabling I suppose there's a green spin on this would be that they're enabling a whole generation of people and a whole raft of people to do things and work from home and work in circumstances they wouldn't otherwise be able to work and sell things online. Maybe that's a good thing. And Toby actually quite famously just recently has committed to planting 1,000,001 trees to offset carbon. I think that was driven by Elon Musk's commitment to plant 1 million.
How much is that?
Come back to that.
How much is that of a PR stunt versus spin, right? Like even the Shopify, it's true that you enable people to work from home, for example. But if in the if that's not the purpose or the goal, you're likely to break some things along the way, right? Like consumers and increasing the adoption of sort of higher electricity consuming activities, right?
Sure, and I'm sure it's a platform that can sell lots of crap that's made out of plastic that's going to last 2 minutes and all sorts of things. I'm not sitting inside Toby's mind or have any insight into the way the board works or how it's driven. What I would say about Toby, and this is something that's been pretty consistent over a number of years, is that he has always had this vision for a business that was built to last. In fact, he spoke at our conference in 2011, so getting on for a decade ago, about how you can go about building a business that you're not embarrassed about in 100 years' time.
Okay, so that's really on the point of sort of what I like to talk about this issue, right? So one of the things that struck me over the last year or so is that, at least in the circles that I've frequented, the topic of climate change, climate emergency, general, real sustainability, right, from an environmental perspective, not this spin aspect of it, does not seem to feature very much in sort of conversations in the SaaS world and the software tech world, right? Both in conferences.
Well, Richard, you've got to understand that we're too busy killing it and crushing it 24/7, 365, and 366 in a leap year.
But if the point of killing it and crushing it is, and I know you're being sarcastic there, of course, but
I am, yeah, sorry, I'm
point,
English. And
the point is,
just,
you know, to build a business that you can be proud of that lasts for 100 years and, you know, or longer, which I've heard this rhetoric from many leaders, many business leaders. How come we're not caring about this aspect of life, right, on our planet? And why is it that we seem to have a blind spot? Is it, I mean, I have some theories, but I don't know. I'd like to hear your opinion, really, because you know the herd, so to speak.
no, I don't have any greater insight than anybody else. I've got plenty of prejudices and plenty of half-formed views. I think it comes down to human nature, doesn't it? And the fact that humans are very, very, very good at persuading themselves that what they're doing is right and for a cause, and that the cause is noble and just, and you have to pick your cause, and you have to find your KPIs and your goals for that. I think, you know, you mentioned before that you think there's a disconnect between the belief in the tech community and science and a lack of interest in environmental issues.
Yeah,
I think that's
underpins a lot of the conversation, you know, as to whether climate change is happening or not, right?
I think you need to disaggregate science and tech. They're two very different things. Now, science is a wonderful thing that I believe in very deeply. It's simply a process of trying to work out whether things are true or not using models and data. Tech is a different thing, and I think there is a difference. If you look at the typical, so I've just started watching Silicon Valley, which I know I'm late to the party. I was waiting for it to kind of go free on some thing that we already subscribed to, but I know I'm actually paying for it series by series now. So I'm kind of coming quite late to that. One of the things that really struck me there is that there's this incredible belief, and it's parodied exceptionally well in Silicon Valley, that tech is changing the world, and tech is changing the world for good. And whether what you're doing in your organization is bad or good, and some of the people in that particular program are demonstrably bad, and I mean, they're sort of archetypical megalomaniac, sociopath, reality distortion field kind of projectors. Their kind of message is, you know, we're doing this for good. And there was a classic line where the CEO founder of Huli was saying, you know, how pissed off he was that he didn't want to be he didn't want to be beaten by another company who was doing good for the world in a way that he could do good for the world, because he needed to be the winner. So you know, you have all sorts of kind of conflations of ego and purpose and, you know, big picture data and information, and you then overlay that with someone's individual worldview. So I think a lot of software entrepreneurs believe in tech more than they believe in science, and science is something that, you know, is there and doesn't change. Tech is a thing that tech is a tool, and tech can be used for all sorts of things. I think there's another thing there that, you know, is increasingly becoming a thing, which is that in the olden days, it was really, really hard to get very, very rich. And even the wealthiest kings weren't rich for forever, because wealth was about castles, and it was about holding gems and gold and jewels and, you know, having taxes, and it was all kept in big chests. But, you know, you had to move it around, and it was very hard to accumulate huge wealth, whereas wealth now is digital. I mean, money is something that exists online, and I'm not even talking about, you know, bullshit coin. I'm talking about
Well, just
dollars and
you can set up a site and be paid into your PayPal account. It never touches your
yeah.
bank. It never touches your wallet.
And you can set yourself up so that no one knows who you are and where you are, and you can accumulate huge amounts of money, and it's very you don't have those wars where one country attacks another country, or one kingdom or one principality attacks another, and you have the kind of the wealth redistributed. I think we've seen this thing increasingly where people have more and more and more money, and it's wealth is getting concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. I should have pressed the mute button there, shouldn't I?
Don't worry, I'll cut that.
So there's then the sort of second bit of that is that people can justify that with well, if I'm a billionaire, if I've got huge amounts of money, I can do some good in the world. And you don't have to believe. And there are plenty of billionaires that do some very high-profile, low-value giving. There are plenty of billionaires that, and Bill Gates would be a great example, I think, of someone who has really thought a lot about what he wants to do and what he wants his long-term legacy to be, and has invested very intelligently in tackling some really big problems.
Yeah.
But we as a society, and we as a global population, shouldn't be reliant on the whims of billionaires to fund the causes that are in.
Donating money to fix the things they might have broken in the creation of that wealth, right?
Yeah.
Which, so if you have broken something, I'd much rather you try to fix it, or if you maybe you can balance out a lack of attention within it.
Yeah.
Sort of like maybe Gates is doing with the foundation, where first half of his life was about business. Now seems to be saying like, what, I've succeeded there, I'm going to put my effort somewhere else, which is absolutely fine.
And he's in a position to do it. And I don't, I have no insight into the world of Bill Gates's mind, but he seems to have a genuine interest and focus and purpose in doing some things that will make a significant difference to very significant populations in the world. And again, I don't know what he's done to get there. I mean, he's one of those kind of people that is a somewhat marmitey figure on some levels, but there are all sorts of stories about how Microsoft behaved as it was growing and built up monopolies. I think if you look at the way that a lot of companies behave now, there is this, whoever came up with this don't ask for permission, beg for forgiveness thing, or the ends justify the means thing. And I think, let's pick on someone more current, someone like, I don't know, Travis Kalanick, for example, from Uber. If you look at the way that he's treated his employees, the way that he's treated his drivers who aren't employees, because he doesn't have any drivers who are employees, because he's actually just enabling them
his customers as well, because by refusing to enforce certain codes of conduct for the drivers and for the staff, the customers have suffered as well.
So the way that Uber has gone after other competitors in other markets, and I mean, there's just a whole litany of things that have been done. And we saw this week the new CEO talking about sort of some of the unfortunate mistakes that the Saudis have made, like killing a journalist in an embassy. That it's a bit unfortunate, and kind of likening that to Uber's cars running over people and killing them, and that's kind of a technical error. So there are people that will do anything to grow, and I do think that that's a major issue. that really makes me think that we have lost sight of, it's not even the moral compass, it's really, are these things okay? Is it okay to suddenly, if these people suddenly become hugely wealthy and then start turning around and giving a few $100 million here and there to various pet charities, does that make it okay? If they give their entire fortune away, or 99% of their fortune, if you've got $100 billion, you've still got $1 billion left. Very few people that make huge amounts of money are ever going to be
I broadly agree with you
objectively poor.
on that kind of thing, right? And in fact, we'll be speaking with one of the founders of the Zebras
Oh yeah,
unicorn thing in a later episode about exactly all of this, right? The sort of growth for growth's sake, and how you break things in the process, right? It's not so much the growth; it's like what happens to your surroundings. But to bring it back a little bit to specifically like business software events, and so on. So you can certainly take some actions to like try to offset your carbon, your travel footprint, and things like that. And I don't want to put you on the spot about that stuff. It would be great if there are things that you could do. But for that compounding effect, what should events, or what can events do to, as maybe you've done with other topics in the past, to talk about this, so that if somebody comes to business software, flies all the way to Boston or to Cambridge from Australia, they've gone back, sure, they can make their business a bit more successful, but should you have also a role in making these people a bit more, actually, maybe we should start being carbon neutral, maybe we should start giving a shit about how much we're affecting the sort of the natural environment, and so on and so forth. What have you thought about that at all as yet?
So I think, taking this from some quite big picture stuff down to what we're doing, one of the things I've found over the years is very hard to preach to people, whether that's about diversity and inclusion in tech, whether that's about climate change, whatever that's about. If you have, so I'm thinking about content here. If I had someone that came along and said, right, we're going to talk to you about why you're all really bad and need to, people will switch off. What I've found is that finding amazing people who have an unexpected aspect to themselves is a much more powerful way of changing hearts and minds. I hate the kind of concept of bringing someone in to talk about women in tech, for example.
Okay, why is that?
Because the kind of people that you really want to be talking, and I want to talk at Boss, are people who are doing amazing things, not talking about being a woman in tech. There's a little, and so finding amazing people. I mean, and I, lots of examples, and who can get up, talk about what they've done and what they've built in their business, or they've done in their lives, is a much more powerful way of telling a story that has that underlying narrative. People can then kind of come in and talk about their experiences as a whatever minority it might be. And I think people are much more receptive, and that's a much better way of changing hearts and minds than bringing someone in who's going to berate people. Sure.
Is there like an example that you can bring up from somebody you've had speaking about, let's say, one of these topics, right, where you can say, this was actually a really good example of somebody not preaching, but really.
So I think it's yes, I can. I'm just wondering whether it's kind of fair to say, that person. Okay. Look at the speakers that we have. I pick I curate very, very tightly. We have 15 speakers over 2.5 days at Business of Software. It's a single track conference.
Mm-hmm.
There is nobody that I would have on stage that I'm not going to stand by and say, that person is not there on their merits. We don't fill quotas. But we have had, a increasingly diverse, and we're, not perfect, and I don't think perfection exists. I mean, particularly when you've got so few people to pick, but they are all experts in their fields and aren't necessarily the standard middle-aged, bald, fat, white guy that's been in tech for 30 years.
Okay, so basically what you're saying that pretty much every one of your speakers sort of fits this mold in some way, because whatever it is they're talking about it from personal experience of success or learning something.
No, I'm not saying that all of my speakers are at all. What I think I'm trying to say is that I look at a topic, a theme, and then rather than say who's the most obvious person to talk about this, which is usually some white guy with a big social media following, because there seems to be some genetic trait which means that white middle-aged men want to kind of big up their parts. We say, okay, well, what's the short list of 20 people, and who actually are the really interesting people here, and who are the people that are going to have a different perspective. I think ask anybody who is worth putting on a stage whether they'd like to come and talk about being a minority in tech, and they will tell you they hate it. Okay. And quite right, because they want to talk about their achievements and the things that they've learned, and I think that's a really important thing. So, there's the content and the stories we tell at Boss tend to be about building a thing or doing a thing and talking very honestly and openly about the challenges that you've had in
I sort of
getting there.
Right? It's like it's trying to be, I don't know what the right words are, but it's like being constructive or forward-looking rather than sort of either rather than self-serving, I suppose, right? Where
yeah, partly, and I think I know the audience, and I've thought a lot about the way people react to different things, not just at our events but at other events, and it's whether you have an event where someone says, okay, and here's the sponsor panel, and they bring in 8 people to sit at a table, and everybody just gets on their laptop or walks out. You know how people react, and I think I've got a reasonable sense of how you can get under the skin of people. We haven't cracked the climate change thing at all yet. I would say that we try not to pump out a lot of crap. So we have bags which are proper things that people keep. I know that people use these as shopping bags.
I actually have one of those downstairs from the 2011 conference that you mentioned. So
2011, and you still use it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And we have here you go. This is our mug from. It was actually the event was in Ireland, so we kind of did a kind of Guinness vibe here, but that's a China mug. We have books here, and we always say to people, if there's anything in the bag that you don't want, please let us know, because we'll take it back, and we keep a few for ourselves so that we've always got notebooks, but then we donate to a couple of local schools and things, because people always need pens, and so we try and think about that quite consciously.
Just one final thing there.
I did go to it. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Just because we have like a few minutes left, and I want to sort of like get this from you.
Well, just before that, let me say, we just do not have the answers to this, and I'm not putting myself out there as a this is the answer, this is the template. We're still struggling with this stuff, we're still thinking about it, and I'm very, very open to any thoughts that people have about how we can reduce our environmental impact, or do things differently. So, this is a conversation on the premise we're exploring ideas. I'm not preaching.
This is exactly the purpose of this. And I hope that maybe from some of the other episodes, if you find the time to listen or at least read through the summaries, there are some things other people are doing. But now I know that Business Software is a deliberately small conference. I think you've kept it to 400?
400, yeah.
Yeah. Which is very small by like tech standards. And something I appreciate, because personally I'm not a big fan of the big meat market conferences. But even though there are different kinds of events, say to SaaStock or SaaStor or stuff like that, I think it would be interesting to hear from you. If somebody out there, wants to speak about this stuff at Business or SaaStock or wherever, and you have a page there where you're soliciting applications for new talks, right? I don't know exactly how it works for you. What's the kind of thing that would work for you? What sort of story are you looking for? Or maybe you don't have a good example, but maybe the general principle. So, just the activism side of it might not be enough for the right.
Okay.
Right? But
so, no, it's a great question. We have over 500 applications to speak a year. We also then go off and find people who we think will fit a slot for a particular topic. So, it's hugely competitive to speak, and I think there's we are spoiled for choice. I think what I generally don't look for in this respect, and whether this is about climate activism or climate change or any other related topic, is someone who is going to focus on that specific thing and talk about principles and a kind of black and white, what's right and what's wrong. I'm much more interested in hearing from people and talking to people, because I think this makes a much bigger difference, who have thought about this and how it actually affects the way that they work and the way that they're doing business, and how have they built activities, processes, systems within their organizations that do two things. Number one, have an impact on the thing that they're talking about. And number two as well, and I think this is important because I really believe quite strongly that there used to be this kind of conversation about, oh, wow, diverse teams make better decisions. It's like, do you know what? We don't need to be told that, because most people, certainly I would say the boss crowd has known that for a long time. We actually want to understand how you work with a more diverse team, how you find different people, how you manage the differences, how you manage the conflicts and the tensions, as much as scientists in America say XYZ is good for you. So we're very much, about the, hey, here's a great thing and everyone knows it's okay. Let's not actually get too hung up on, is treating people equally in the workplace a good thing? Hey, here's some numbers. That's really not interesting. What's interesting, I think, is how you do that, and where you've been successful, and more importantly, where you haven't been successful. What assumptions did you make going into some kind of project or process that were challenged, that you ultimately kind of did things differently? So yeah, that I think would be the thing that would really be interesting there.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Mark. Hello, me again. Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope that was as interesting and useful for you as it was for me. As always, I encourage you to visit our website, fatalair.blog, to subscribe to our mailing list, and find other ways to contribute and help us support the project. Thank you very much, and see you next time.